Good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming to the second Sustainability Business Development Forum, The Circular Economy. My name's George Demadakis and I'm a director of Symphony 7. So who is Symphony 7? Symphony 7 is a business membership community designed to facilitate business connections that will increase profits, enabling leaders to engage and contribute to sustainable development causes they believe in, thereby making the world a better place. There's been an amazing uptake to this event, but before we get started, some basic housekeeping. For best viewing experience, please choose Speaker View. Please ensure the name in your video window is your correct full name. This is critically important so that we can ensure that you end up in the right stream that you have selected when you registered. We will also be recording the session, so if you choose not to be wanting to be recorded, please hide your video. During this main session, please keep yourself on mute. Use the chat box for discussion and comments. So why is this event important? Charles Darwin, Origin of Species, is famous for saying what? Survival of the fittest. But what does that actually mean? Survival of the fittest, when you read his book, he actually says means better design for immediate local environment. Better design for an immediate local environment, not the strongest physically. So that means how we take care of each other will determine the survival of our planet and species. So how we take care of each other, and this is what all this is about, how we take care of each other for survival of our species and our planet. We want this day to be stimulating and for an ongoing connection and action. So this will be something that we will actually talk to you about and provide you with a way forward at the end of this session. We're looking forward to an amazing session with you, all led by distinguished panelists and experts. So a little bit about the process this morning. Our moderator, Frank White, will facilitate a keynote discussion with Simon McEwen, AO, who has a distinguished career in business, including currently being the Chancellor of Monash University and Australian of the Year in 2011. He is a non-exec director of the National Australia Bank and Rio Tinto. From there, we will have an overview of what each stream will cover for all to hear, and then you will break it out into the groups and streams that you have chosen during your registration. We also have Zara, a graphic recorder, who will be working live in the background to capture what is being discussed. Once we get to the group sessions, we trust you will engage in the conversation constructively, contributing to each other's solutions for better sustainable development. I would like to now introduce you to our moderator, Frank White. Frank transitioned his career from teacher to business strategist many years ago. He is a recognised specialist in innovative strategic and business model thinking with over 40 years experience. He brings together teams of expertise and excellence to drive opportunity and growth through business innovation, leadership, collaboration and strategy in startups to medium and large companies. He's also the facilitator of several strategic think tanks and forums and founder of several companies, including enterprising partnerships. Welcome, and over to you, Frank.
Thanks very much, George, and welcome to everyone who's agreed to join us again today. This being the second of our forum series around sustainable development for business. It's a fantastic opportunity on this occasion for us to talk about the circular economy. Before I start, however, I'd like to actually acknowledge the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation as the traditional custodians of the Melbourne region, and pay respects to their elders past and present. These were the original practitioners of sustainable development. We have much to learn from them, both from their past practices and their future leaders. My name's Frank White and I'm moderator, as I've said, and my granddaughter expresses to me occasionally when I sit and chat to her quietly, her anxiety about where the world's heading and what's going to happen to the world for her and her kids. So she starts to think about these things, even though she's only the age of 13. She's still when you quietly have a conversation with her, she talks about these types of matters. I want to give her confidence that we're not rushing to extinction, that we are in fact finding ways through this, and that business leaders as well as governments are actually stepping up and finding the solutions that we need. And what marks this generation, I believe, is the way in which business leaders have actually stepped up and started to act more strategically around issues of sustainable development and understood that there is actually a business model associated with that process and that they can actually live more sustainably through their businesses. I'm delighted to be able to moderate this forum on behalf of Symphony 7. I remind you that we're about to introduce Simon Akean, who I'll do in a minute. There are 4 facilitators also who will run different breakout rooms that you've all chosen to register to as part of your registration process. And that, as George said, I'd like you to make sure that you're on speaker view. Now, for those who are unfamiliar with Zoom, if you go to the top right-hand corner, you'll see a little box that says view. If you click on that, it gives you the view options. If you go to speaker view, you get the best performing opportunity for you to actually participate in the conversations as we go. We also need you to remain on mute for the moment so that we don't have background dogs barking and kids walking into the room around you, which is all part of the life on Zoom these days, I've got to say. I've met more of my colleagues' kids and dogs during this time, and it's been wonderful. So if you have any questions, go to the chat area and lodge them there, because Jenny's moderating that and she'll keep an eye on those and make sure that there's an answer associated with that. When we get into the group sessions, I'd really ask you and invite you to contribute constructively, to be respectful of each other's contributions and to build on each other's ideas as part of that process. So without any further ado, I'd like to introduce Simon Akean. Thank you for those technicians working behind the scene diligently. He just pops up magically. Hello, Simon. Good morning.
Morning, Frank.
Good morning. We've had a screen occasionally just kickstarting all of this, showing your background. But there's a couple of extra bits there that I'd like to emphasise as part of the conversation this morning that we're going to have. Not only are you the Chancellor of Monash University, the largest concentration of public research anywhere in Australia. There's no other university complex anywhere in Australia that's as large as Monash. That whole complex. I don't just mean the university, CSIRO, synchrotron, every other thing that's out there. And the university is part of the drive that's generating that whole thing. You were also Australian of the Year in 2011, I recall, and you're the chair of an organisation that's got a monstrous name. The Australian Industry Energy Transition Initiative Steering Group. Who could have thought that up?
Let's not go there.
You're also on multiple boards, including a little mining company called Rio Tinto, and you're former chair of AMP, MyOb, and CSIRO, all extraordinarily large organisations, and all who are progressively starting to step in and state their position in terms of the circular economy and sustainable business development. Simon, a person who's wiser than me, I must say, once said to me, everything existing today was once imagined. We need to be able to imagine the possible before we can act on it. This big organisation with the hairy, audacious name, the Australian Industry ETI, is seeking to influence and assist industries, big, powerful, historically polluting industries, to change their practice and to, although I've lost Simon's image. Yeah. There he is, he's back again. To start to contribute to a decarbonisation of our world in a way that they can actually contribute to that and see that as an objective that they can imagine. It must take an enormous vision by the board of that organisation to assist those companies, those industries, to actually start thinking that through. how are you going about assisting those companies in those big industries to achieve that objective?
Thanks, Frank. It's a very big question, and perhaps if I just say one or two things before I actually answer it. Firstly, and I'm glad you've mentioned the name of it. I don't want to anymore. We'll just call it the initiative. It's very Australian, and it's got some really good things about it that are very Australian. But to be perfectly honest, we copied something that was in the UK, where a bunch of very big businesses came around and acknowledged that they had something to do and they could do it better if they got around the same table and shared data. We've taken that model, so we've copied it. That's the bad bit. The good bit is we've made it a whole lot better, because here, in addition to having, the biggest polluters in the land, and that's really where it starts, because the wonderful thing about today's, seminar is that, as I understand it, there are hundreds of people on this and coming from all walks of life, multiple, thousands of business connections, et cetera, and that's absolutely excellent and necessary. What the initiative does, though, is focus on just a much smaller number of businesses, and they have, unfortunately, the collective responsibility of doing most of the polluting. So they're in the big, heavy, dirty industries, whether it's iron ore into steel, LNG is a base source of power, aluminium consumes a huge amount of power in a couple of different ways, other key metals as well, the chemicals industry. And at the end of the day, we need them all. We need them because actually a lot of what they do is going to help us transition into a new world as well. So even though what they're doing is thoroughly unacceptable in relation to the emissions they collectively produce, we have to work to change them. And let me tell you just, something that perhaps people exclusively in small business may not understand, but these big businesses, they're often, widely held, listed on the stock exchange. And I can't emphasize the voice that they hear constantly, not just from increasingly activist shareholders that are saying, for goodness sake, get your act together, but actually a whole lot of other voices, constant. In particular, the voice of the consumer. Now, a lot of these big companies produce stuff that don't end up in, or that they don't go to retail markets, they go to another big industrial group for fabrication. But that supply chain ends up with people like you and me buying something. And we are, believe it or not, increasingly saying we don't want to buy something that has, along that supply chain, produced too many carbon emissions. So there's this very strong voice going right back to the base mining companies and the producers of these basic goods saying, if you're doing this the wrong way, what you are producing is going to be becoming increasingly uncompetitive. Doesn't matter how much you lower your cost, lower your price, we won't buy it, because ultimately people are increasingly saying, we don't want to buy this. And I'll just jump in with one example. I'm not a coffee drinker, but Nespresso has all those little aluminium pods, are they? Full of coffee.
The pods.
And and they have just agreed a little while ago to absolutely emissions-free aluminium. Basically, aluminium, simply speaking, consumes a huge amount of power. That's not too bad, because a lot of aluminium is made from hydroelectricity, so that's fine. But it also uses another part of the technology, a thing involving an anode. I won't get into detail, but the anode depletes and converts alumina to aluminium, and at the same time emits a huge amount of carbon as well. And there's a radical process that's been developed between Apple, Alcoa, and Rio Tinto to get away from having to use that anode. And all of a sudden, aluminium can be actually produced without any emissions. And there's a world out there saying, bring it on. And starting with Nespresso, who wants to go out publicly and say, look, please buy all your coffee in these little aluminium pods. And they're either made from recycled aluminium, which is brilliant, or stuff that's been dug out of the ground and actually converted into aluminium without emissions. So, and we're going to see this across a range of different industries. And the people that are ahead of the game will actually obviously have a benefit. So that enables me to say very quickly that, yes, in Australia, we've got a bunch of the biggest and dirtiest emitters, Orica, BHP, BP, Woodside, BlueScope, the list goes on, along with a number of other companies that facilitate what they do. So the bank I'm involved in, NAB, is a member, as are some of the investors, such as Australian Super. And they've come around a very big table. Many of them feel quite isolated here in Australia. They're not right in the middle of some of the technology that's being developed to help them transition. And we've done really one or two things that we hope will assist a lot. Firstly, in the center of the table, if you like, we've got two of the very best research organizations that we can find, one being CSIRO. CSIRO has an array of different relationships with companies. It does work for companies all the time. But this is an opportunity where it can do it really efficiently by addressing a bunch of big emitters at the same time very efficiently. And another group similar to CSIRO, but it's based in North America. It's the Rocky Mountain Institute, and it's focused purely on this energy transitions research. And then secondly, getting these big companies, they're often in the same industry, and we've got to be careful about ACCC issues and that sort of thing. But, you know, them coming together and in the right way, sharing technologies, because what's to be achieved here is not just being competitive, but to actually ensure that they go into the new world in a way with, you know, technologies and processes and what have you that are going to be appropriate. And they need a lot of help because, you know, it's not the easiest thing to do to transition these large companies.
One of the things that I've noticed is in reading annual reports of companies, etc., increasingly they're setting targets. Targets that the board's setting and then saying to management, this is where you've got to get to in terms of your sustainable, you know, these are the principles, these are the objectives. Now you go and find out how to do it. And governments are doing similarly. You know, Sweden's told the car industry, it's not our job to actually manufacture cars, it's your job, but this is what you got to do in terms of the production of a car. These are the emissions, these are the heat transfers, etc. Now, organisations like Monash must be contributing to that agenda, to the manufacturing sectors around it in southeast Melbourne and elsewhere. What's your view of how that's working, Con?
That's a good question, Frank. I think it's patchy, and you know, I'm Chancellor of the university. I'm not going to speak poorly of it because it's a remarkable institution. It is huge, and it's a pretty young university, which is even more extraordinary. But the reason I give your broadest, you know, very broad question a you know, a bare pass, if I can put it that way, is that it is patchy, and that's largely to do with actually not so much whether Monash is deficient, but it's operating in an Australian culture where big business to start with isn't, you know, it doesn't invest in R&D like its counterparts overseas. We have to acknowledge that. Equally, the university sector, I think, can be better at reaching out and putting its tentacles into business and vice versa. And that's where I always start on this broad question.
Business has to become more mature also in terms of the way in which it relates and drags stuff out of universities.
Absolutely right. And I make this criticism in the most constructive way I can, because there's good news everywhere, but it can be better. And we've just got to break down these silos. And frankly, you know, to just start, the more people transfer between these two very broad sectors, the better. But to come to Monash itself, look, Monash itself was the very first of the 40 universities we have in this country that publicly stated, you know, an energy reduction target. And today it's saying very prominently, you know, it'll be net zero by 2030. It's got 1/6 of one of the very largest wind farms in the country, the Marrawara wind farm, and is establishing its own microgrid in that area that you described before. It's not just Monash, it's that whole industrial technology precinct, including CSIRO and and a bunch of other manufacturing. It is the second largest employment part of the greater CBD. It's massive, and Monash University is on the front foot trying to create that entire precinct to be as energy efficient as possible. But there's a whole bunch of different parts of Monash that are working with industry. For example, that initiative that we talked about a moment ago is really only been established because of a part of Monash University called Climate Works. Climate Works
Yes.
is chaired by former Deputy Premier John Thwaites, and it's busy assisting businesses, big and small, right around the country, get into this new world. With its students, for example, we have a little business called Monash Forge. Forge is old-fashioned stuff, but at the end of the day, if we're really going to be clever at recycling, we've got to understand it's not just a matter of turning a Bunsen burner on and making something that's metallic into liquid and then letting it freeze again. Not at all. It's a highly, highly scientific process if we're really to recycle extremely well. We have a huge partnership with Woodside, where a whole array of different projects are underway. And Woodside needs this because, it's a heavily, our biggest gas exporter, et cetera. It knows it's going to have to change its business model over time. And there's a huge amount of work going on in the hydrogen area in that partnership, as you'd expect. Perhaps, I could go on and on, but I'll just conclude with one example. There's a little company called Amiro Additive Manufacturing, which was really hosted by Monash University some years ago. It's now listed on the stock exchange. You can buy shares in it if you want to. But what does it do? It actually started off really well. It started off in a number of different areas, but it was well known for its 3D printing focus. And for example, it was the very first business in the world to produce, believe it or not, a jet engine that had been 3D printed. Don't ask me anything technical about that, Frank. But what it's done, drawing upon the scale and might and technology that comes out of the university, is that it's way bigger than a 3D printing company. Yeah. It is very interested in researching on the materials that go into, the basic materials that go into the 3D manufacturing process. That, of course, is all about interesting blends of metals. It's a fast developing area, and quite aside from the tooling itself, 3D printers isn't just one thing. There are all sorts of different ways, size, shapes that take particular alloys and what have you. Massive business and massive business opportunity. And the reason that company, I hope, will continue to be very, very successful is that it's literally next door to Monash University, and will draw upon the R&D that's coming out of that place.
I know that there's a little company that I have some connections with in terms of consulting with them, called Geofabrics. They make a fabric that goes underneath road surfaces and coastal verges and mine sites and the like. Yeah. They've started to make that fabric out of recycled plastics. And it's, 5 years ago, talking to that management, they would not have even thought about it. Yeah. It's been good quality science coming out of Monash that's actually assisted them to understand how to do that. The synchrotron's given them an appreciation of what actually happens to that fabric under certain conditions, because you can't see it underneath the road. And so the synchrotron can simulate that process. It's just another example of a company that stepped up and said, we're going to have a crack at this and do something different.
Yeah, so, and Frank, that's the best example. I'm glad you mentioned it, because I saw it just a week or so ago, not wearing my Monash hat, just as someone who switched the TV on. And as someone who is incredibly depressed with the amount of refuse that we seem to, rubbish that we seem to put out. And let's be very serious, we are really struggling properly to recycle that stuff. If we think as individuals, we put it in the right coloured bin that goes out and it's all perfectly processed. Well, let me depress you very quickly, because
Yes.
we are really struggling with what goes on beyond the, once the dump truck takes it away. And that particular idea of yours, you can just imagine the scale of what it requires. And I really hope that goes well, that one.
So let me wrap up. Thank you, Simon, for your contribution today, not only for your contribution to this morning's conversation, but also for what you've been contributing across leadership of businesses. I'd like to thank you and invite you to stay on for the rest of the conversation. And we move now to introducing the facilitators. So thanks very much, Simon.
Thanks, Frank.
So today we have 4 facilitators and their business guests who will kickstart these discussions on our behalf. They will be the enablers of the conversations that you people will actually contribute to as part of this morning. Our first facilitator, it holds a senior position with ABB, a Swedish multinational corporation headquartered in Zurich, and a global Fortune 500 company for 24 years. Alex Koslovich is the Product Marketing Director for ABB, and he'll set the scene discussing sustainable cities and communities, drawing upon the work of Aspire and creating a marketplace for a circular economy. Thank you, Alex.
Good morning, all. Thank you, Frank. Look, in a couple of minutes, I'll just introduce what we've discussed this morning. Fascinating insight into what Simon had to say as well. And one of the topics that he touched on was 3D printing. And there is a lot of scope in reducing waste just in that itself. But in the breakout group this morning, we're talking about the circular economy. And probably the best example of that is what we used to do many, many years ago, which is when we used to get milk in milk bottles and soft drinks in soft drink bottles, and we would return these bottles that would then be refilled. So the concept is, okay, there's one part which is recycling, surely. We need to minimize our waste and recycle. But how do we repurpose products that already exist? Because we expend a lot of energy in crushing glass to then rebuild that glass into another product, as an example. So I'm lucky to be joined this morning by Cameron McKenzie, who, with the help of CSIRO and an algorithm, can connect businesses that have a waste problem, that waste then becomes a viable solution for somebody else's problem. And I was also lucky enough, and I wrote his name down, there's a gentleman this morning that I met, Richie Dutton, seems to have a very similar process or concept for building materials. So that's the discussion topic we'll have this morning. One that definitely fascinates me. And people unashamedly, people who know me know that I love my cars. And one of the things I really enjoy is the concept of taking Tesla drivetrains from wrecked Teslas and dumping them into a classic vehicle of some type to repurpose a classic vehicle. So electric conversions is my personal passion. So I hope that gives you a bit of an insight into what we'll be discussing this morning. And yeah, looking forward to it. Over to you, Frank.
Thanks very much, Alex. So carbon lives in the soils and is essential for natural balance. However, we realise and release it through our many practices. Just imagine if we could repurpose that carbon and get it back into the soils. Our next panellist has more than 6 years' experience in senior governance roles across business and finance, is a director of the RACV Finance, the Loddon Mallee Waste and Resource Recovery Organisation, and Greening Australia. And those are only just to mention a few. I've got to tell you, there's a long list. Julie Green, could I now introduce you and invite you to talk about life on land? Thanks, Julie. Julie, you're on mute still, Julie.
Oh, I think I get the winner of, can you turn that mute off? So thanks very much, Frank. It's great to be here. I'm of the view that we are now in November 2020. So we have, guys, only 9 years to go before the United Nations 2030 goals can be achieved. So we really are in transition. But there is hope, because we have been looking at the linear economy, which is about manufacturing, using and disposing, and we know that that is not working. So that's why we're talking about the circular economy today. And it is really a systems approach, but we can move towards those 2030 goals if we educate ourselves, if we're strategic, and we collaborate across the world. So you're quite right. My session, Life on Land, is about the soil. It's about carbon in the soil. And my special guest is Ian Jones from Carbon Asset Solutions. He's chairman there, and he's also managing director of a sister company called Nature's Coin. And those two entities are really about climate action. I've known Ian for 3 years, and he and his colleagues have developed some fantastic technologies that he will be launching in early 2021 in Australia and America and Europe. So what is it? Well, it's actually to rethink what carbon is. In Australia, we probably think about it being a tax, but it isn't a tax. It's actually a business opportunity. So carbon assets can be created, which is backed by value that then can be traded. And that shift has really come about because we've sort of shifted from carbon emissions reduction, which of course we must do. But where do those carbons go? They go into the atmosphere. And this is a process of drawing down that carbon back into the soil. A very little known fact is that 20%, only 20% of CO2 emissions is actually from agriculture. So if we look at regenerative agriculture as a solution, then we can make some significant progress. So Ian will explain that there's been historically 2 constraints. One is around the financial hurdles. So what is this carbon credit? But it's now become more accepted so that we can trade a carbon credit just like we can trade gold or silver or other commodities. And the other constraint is actually the technology. So now that we have some very clever people in Auburn University in the States, they have developed a way of precision measurement in respect of carbon in the soil. So what does all that mean? Well, it means that SME owners such as yourselves, mum and dad investors, or even big companies can actually assess their footprint and therefore know what their emissions are and purchase a carbon asset. And that's really what they do.
It's exciting.
It's a fantastic impact. So, and also Carbon Asset Solutions are doing a capital raise. So if anyone in the audience is interested in that, I'm sure Ian will be very pleased to hear from you. So I can promise a really fascinating Life on Land session. It will be challenging. And if you think about it, Frank, it's the ultimate in a circular economy because we're taking carbon from the atmosphere and putting it back into the soil, which of course is where it's come from.
Very exciting, Julie.
Thanks, Frank. I'll hand back to you.
Thank you very much. So whilst Julie and her guest Ian will talk about this exciting scientific solution for measuring and regenerating the natural balance, our next panelist will demonstrate that not everything needs to be thrown away and how that can actually impact on responsible consumption. John Englander is the founder of Planet Earth, the cleaning company with a strong focus on responsible consumption. Thank you, John. John, you're on mute.
My turn, Julie. I was thinking what you said before, Frank, about anything can be imagined, and it's so true. And couldn't help thinking about Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory and Little Charlie. Except I just didn't know what he did with his wrappers at the end of the day.
Oh, no.
But he was highly rewarded for being frugal or being careful. And you see the abundance of life came to him, no different to us as people on the planet if we're really careful with stuff. Here's the thing. All products are a story. They have a beginning, a middle, and an end. The end, or maybe not. So here's the interesting thing is that at the chapter 1, we could talk about all the raw materials that come together, the resources and really depleting, and then bring it together to be manufactured, chapter 2, and then chapter 3 being our use. Most people think of the use, nothing else. Just like a car, you just drive and off you go. And the fourth part is, then what? Then what? I mean, waste, it's an interesting subject because who invented it? Nature doesn't have waste. So it begs the question, and I guess, you know, there's a continuous reuse of elements and resources in nature. And so it's a circularity, and Julie talked about carbon being, you know, in and out and so forth, no different. So in death, there's life, frankly, and we can extract resources that are no longer useful. I mean, let's look at this for a moment. In Australia alone, the average Australian spends $260 a year on stuff they never use. Sounds like nothing, right? What do you do with that nothing? Chuck it? Maybe pass it on, hopefully, gift it to someone else. But the interesting thing is that is $7 billion worth of stuff not used. So then what? Why make it in the first place? Just like why make coffee pods in the first place when you could put the coffee in the machine? So that's the point. So, you know, it allows me to really think about stuff and hopefully allows you to think about stuff. But I want to rewrite the end, and that's what we're going to do in our workshop. So that could be to be continued. In the meantime, I've got Glenn Davidson joining me, who I met some 15 years ago. He involved in consultancy for now the last 25 years in sustainability. And I walk into his office on a freezing cold day, no heater on. And I mentioned it to him. I said, Glenn, it's cold in here. He said, well, that's why I wear a jumper. He said, I know, everyone else would actually turn up the thermostat. Here's the thing. He would tell me so much about what he's planning to do. But in the meantime, he's not only facilitated organizations, he's written courses for both federal and state government, and even been involved with UCLA. His stuff and his knowledge is off the charts, and I really much welcome him today as my co-facilitator. Thanks, everyone. Let's talk about how to improve the carbon economy and make things a bit more circular. That's what we'll do in the workshop. Thanks, Frank. Over to you.
Thanks very much, John. Good on you. So we've all seen the devastating images of what occurs below water in our planet. Our oceans and waterways play an essential role in sustaining our life on this planet. They absorb about 30% of the carbon dioxide released into the atmosphere. They're also essential for our livelihoods. They create employment, they provide transport corridors, they provide us with rich beauty, yet we continue to pollute them. And as you know, the conversation with Simon indicated, we're struggling to actually keep up with that level of pollution. Our next panelist has had 23 years leading a global and locally owned FMCG business, and has most recently been the managing director of McCormick's Foods Australia and companies like Tetley Australia. He's probably launched more products than you and I have had breakfasts, and is now a consultant to many others, whilst he's also chair of the Marine Mammal Conservation Foundation. I'd like to introduce you to Graham Robinson, who will lead the next session. Thanks, Graham.
Good morning, all, and thanks, Frank. Plastics, especially soft plastics like these, are one of the biggest threats to the marine environment. Marine mammals like the endangered Brunan dolphins in Port Phillip Bay and Gippsland Lakes, and more generally, marine life below water, which is very much out of sight and out of mind. It is estimated that 4 billion plastic bags are used in Australia each year, with approximately 150 million ending up in our marine environment. 29,000 recyclable plastic bags are thrown away each hour in Australia, with only 3% of Australia's plastic bags being recycled. So it's a great opportunity for the circular economy. This doesn't include other common grocery packaging such as bread bags, frozen food bags, chip and biscuit packets, rice and pasta bags, and many more. These soft scrunchable plastics are the major contributors to marine debris, with soft plastics causing entanglements, ingestion, and deaths in marine mammals. And our founder and head of research, Dr. Kate Robb, knows only too well, because she does necropsies on whales, dolphins, and other marine mammals for the whole of southeastern waters of Australia. And she can show you firsthand exactly the devastating impact it has on marine life. Despite all this, 91% of Australians are concerned about the environmental impacts of packaging. So we've got a great well of opportunity out there and potential response from consumers if we can put the right solutions in front of them. Looking at the waste hierarchy, the most favoured obviously is prevention, right at the top of the pyramid, and then minimisation. So consumer choice and rethinking of our use and over-reliance on single-use soft plastics is the #1 priority in reducing the impact of waste on the environment. And at Marine Mammal Foundation, we do a lot of work in this space through our education, community outreach, Bin Not Bay and Litter-Free Lakes litter initiatives, and also through our incredible and quite innovative Marine Champions program for the next generation of marine environment and science. Our below the water guest today is Mark Jacobson. Mark is the Managing Director of Replas. Replas is a market leader and a fantastic example of how the circular economy works by converting post-consumer soft plastics and post-commercial plastic waste into bollards, furniture, fencing, and other products for aged care, aquatic, education, sports, and park settings. It is an amazing business. Replas was one of the early adopters of the marine economy, the circular economy concept, having started in 1998. Mark has worked towards changing the culture of corporate Australia by encouraging industry leaders to take responsibility and stewardship for the waste they produce, especially plastic waste. Replas is built upon a successful process and product innovation base, and the most recent breakthrough is creating an aggregate for concrete, for use in concrete paths. And those of you who join us in our breakout room, I'm sure Mark will tell us a lot more about that. So we're looking forward to seeing you in our breakout room to discuss the circular economy with Mark and Marine Mammal Foundation's founder and head of research, Dr. Kate Robb. So back to you, Frank.
Thanks very much, Graham. I'm looking forward to hearing of all of those breakout rooms when we actually come back, and some inspiring ideas that might come from them. The panelists have now set the scene for our conversations in the breakout rooms. And unlike the earlier networking sessions where we could hardly get through the collecting of phone numbers, the breakout rooms have actually got a significant amount of time associated with them. We've got about 40 minutes in each breakout room. So there's time for us to actually have some pretty intensive conversations and to listen and hear from each other's points of view. We'll have time also for you to share ideas through the chat area connected to that. And we can go on to have further connections by the LinkedIn profiles that you've been putting into the conversation area through the chat area. Jenny, I believe, will shortly move us into, or one of our back room people will actually move us into the breakout rooms. Just a couple of housekeeping issues just before we get started in there, though. Please be generative, listen to each other, build on each other's ideas, and contribute your own personal thoughts in the chat area so that these can be captured and built progressively over time. If you get lost at any point in time, don't panic if you hit the wrong button or feel as though you've been wandering around in the ether somewhere. Just go back to the main room or put a message into the chat area and someone will find you from there and they'll pull you back into the breakout room. You'll go to the breakout rooms automatically, so you shouldn't get lost at anyhow. So from here, I'm handing back to Jenny and the technical team to actually support us in terms of moving to the breakout rooms. Thanks very much, guys. Over to you.
We'll be heading into the breakout room very, very soon.
Thanks very much.
So for those who are left in the room, Brendan, what room would you like to head into?
The one Life on Land, please.
Great. Matt, Mad Comms, what room?
Matt Murray. That's Matt Murray.
Oh, Matt Murray. Sorry, can't hear you, mate.
Mate, whatever. Doesn't matter. Don't mind. All good. Mystery. That's what happens when you don't listen to the rules.
Mystery.
Give me one moment.
What?
Great. Karen, so the rest of you can turn your mics on and let's just allocate you to the room. Karen, what room?
I'll go into Alex's. That's fine. Yeah, thank you.
Sustainable cities.
Yeah.
Great. Sam?
Sustainable cities, please.
Great. Jenaline?
Hi. I'll go. Sorry, I have a mind blank. But gentleman who talked about, you know, recycling.
Yeah. Responsible consumption.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Louise?
I'll go with Graham into the underwater one, please.
Robert's iPad and Philippe?
Yeah, Robert Goodliff. I'll go to Sustainable Cities, please.
And Philippe? You're on mute at the moment, Philippe.
Simon, did you want to jump into a room?
Yeah, look, I might go into Julie's Life on the Land, if that's all right. Yeah.
You're awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.
Jesse, Philippe wants to go to John. He can't speak, so he typed that in the chat.
Oh, thanks, mate. John is responsible consumption.
Yeah. Enjoy, Philippe.
That's it.
Have you guys pressed record in your other computers?
Yeah, recording.
Awesome. Awesome.
Great stuff,
Zara,
guys.
how you going?
Who, me?
How's Zara doing?
Oh, good. Yeah, going well.
Show us what you've done.
Hey?
Can you show us what you've done?
Oh, yeah, sure.
Guys, Zara is the champion of the world.
Oh, thank you, Jenny. Yeah, I'll just color it while everyone's in the breakout.
Amazing. Love it.
Thank you.
Jesse, what are your thoughts? It's cool, isn't it?
Awesome.
Hey, Jesse, just real quick, if I mute the computer that is recording in the breakout, if I just mute the speakers, that's not going to stop recording, is it? The audio?
You mean if you mute your computer?
Yeah, just a computer speaker on the keyboard there.
Yeah, no, it still records.
Oh, this is paranoid there.
Going really well, guys. Thank you.
Yeah, it's looking really good. Well done on the switching, Tim.
Yeah, you did a damn good job.
Yeah, did you see my message about the Alex?
Oh yeah, you needed to have a bathroom break.
I didn't want to go